Okay, so session's being recorded. Okay, so this session is with Robert Prawl. I hope I'm pronouncing that roughly correctly. And he's going to talk about, as it says on the screen there, modern CI/CD concepts for Dynamics 365 enterprise projects. This is something that I'm really interested in, so I'm looking forward to this session, as I don't know enough about it. But just a few points of admin is, if you can stay on mute unless you wanted to ask a question, that would be great. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that, and I'll sort of drop them in on Robert as we go along at an appropriate point in time, or you can raise your hand likewise with the Teams feature to ask a question at a point, and I will let Robert know just in case he's not able to keep track of who's got their hands raised, things like that. But I just want to say thanks very much to Robert for presenting and for taking the time to do this. The session will be recorded and we'll share the slides afterwards if we possibly can. So if there's any links or anything coming up on the screens, I'll also do my best to drop them in the chat as well. But with that, I will hand over to Robert and say thanks very much and look forward to the session.
Okay, well, thank you. Hi and welcome to my session about modern CI/CD concepts for Dynamics 365 systems. My name is Robert, and today I would like to talk about automated deployments for Dynamics 365, especially in an enterprise environment. So if you think about enterprise environments, in most cases, things are a little bit different. So usually you don't have access to a production system, so you have to talk to other people and you have to clarify a lot of things due to legal restrictions and things like that. So it really totally makes sense to find an automated way to deploy things. And I will talk about different use cases, for example, how to implement a process to deploy flows. I'm talking about Power Automate, and you can put all of those things within one Azure pipeline and you don't have to do any manual things. And I would like to give you some basic recommendations when you have to design such a Azure pipeline and think about different restrictions and things like that. So I want to share some of my experience here. And of course, the whole thing is time boxed. So we have a 10 minutes Q&A session at the end, but feel free to interrupt me at any time. Okay. Okay, here we go. Let's take a quick look at our agenda today. I would like to introduce you to the topic, just a few sentences about the basic concept and why we should do that. And then I would like to talk about different strategies. So, of course, you can write your custom code and you can use other tools as well. And all of those has some advantages and disadvantages. And I would like to give you a quick overview. And I think one of the most important things is configuration data. So when we talk about deployments, we don't say, okay, we would like to migrate something. So we're not talking about the account, about configuration unit log. And you have to consider those data. Usually it's dynamic. So partially it's static things, but also environment specific. You got hierarchies and so on. So it's quite an important topic. In most cases, people are using Excel worksheets or something, and well, it's quite painful. It's a real nightmare. And of course, one thing, automated update of components like web resources and assemblies and so on. Deployment container, for example, Azure Pipelines. I think this is one of the most important thing here, because of course you can use your solution and you can export it and save it as a zip file and import it again, but it's quite painful and the efforts are very high. So it's much better to have a thing like Azure Pipelines and some sample use cases. And I also would like to talk about compliance and enterprise. Okay, then let's start. Sorry about that. Some reason my pen is not working. Okay, well, just a few lines about myself. Many years ago, I started as a .NET software developer. And the last 5 years, I had the pleasure to work closely together with colleagues from Microsoft and other partners in many different countries and projects, in most cases enterprise projects. So I'm pretty sure what I'm talking about deployments, because I actually have a lot of experience in this area. So, okay, just to give you. Okay, just to give you some context, I'm working for Coop. Coop is a company founded back in 2012, and we're located in Austria, and we actually focused on productivity tools. So of course we are strongly related with Microsoft, and our focus is Dynamics 365. And for example, we're doing a lot of deployments and consulting services. And of course we are official supplier of Microsoft and a server partner, just to give you some context here. But now let's focus on our main topic, why automated deployments? Well, sorry? Okay. I don't want to go into every single detail here, but let me focus on two of them. For example, number 2, avoid human errors. And in most cases, people think, okay, well, the root cause of failed deployment is a very complex process with a lot of dependencies and so on. Well, I don't think so. In many cases, it's a very tiny thing. For example, like a typo or something. So if you have a lot of configuration data and you're using numbers or something like that, and you try to import it to your system, maybe you have a different culture, another person is importing the data, and instead of a dot, you're using a comma to separate values. And well, that can be quite painful because you don't realize it immediately. So after 10 weeks or something, users will say, hey, there's something wrong in a calculation or something. So, well, then you have to maintain the data, you have to fix it, and the efforts are quite high. So, well, always consider that, try to avoid manual steps. And another pretty cool thing is number 5, any member can deploy. Well, I have so many times I heard this thing like, okay, we can't deploy right now because we have dependencies, a very specific person, nobody else can do that. Well, this is quite painful. You can't do it in an enterprise project. You can't wait for a specific person to execute some stuff. Sometimes people have a very large deployment guideline and they have to read it, and actually nobody cares about it to maintain this document. And well, anyway, it's not a good approach. So you really should go for the automated deployment approach, and everyone, team member should be able to start a deployment. Of course, it must be some kind of technical person with some basic knowledge, but you don't have to read a whole document regarding the deployment thing. Okay, and the other points are very straightforward. Documentation efforts and things like that, compliance policies and so on, And of course, release more often, It doesn't make sense to release just twice a year or something, It's cool. Back in the days, you'd have done that, but today it's not a good approach. Okay, let me give an example here. In this case, we can ignore the box at the left corner here. Let's focus on the different systems here. So this is a very typical thing. We got our development system here. Let me try if we can do that here. Okay, development, and from development we go to test. And usually what people do, they start with a code components. So basically you develop something, you have your components, and then you're using some SDK tool to upload the components. So your local assemblies, your local web resources, and so on. And every team member, every developer has to do that. And well, there's a high chance that you make a mistake. For example, you forgot to get the latest source code, so you basically overwrite something from another team member and things like that. So, well, this is quite bad sometimes, but it works. Okay, so first step here. Then you have to export the solution from your development system to your test system. And usually people are using a browser like Chrome or something. And you download the zip files, you store it on some local place, and then you have to import. It's a very common approach, nothing special here. But the thing is, people are so used to that situation, they don't think about the change. Because on the second stage, you have to use Excel. So of course, you import some stuff from your development system, and you put it into an Excel worksheet and some other data, XML, JSON, whatever. And then you can use some community tools like XM Toolbox and so on. And again, it works, but you have to do it twice because you have to do the same thing for production as well. And sometimes you have to do some maintenance stuff. You're using it again, you have to start some tool. And the process is quite simple, but in an enterprise environment, in most cases, you have things like proxies, web proxies, and things like that. You don't have plain credentials. So there are a lot of tiny things, and you have to do it again and again. And with each single step, the risk is higher that you make a mistake. And again, well, if you make just one little mistake, sometimes you are not able to figure it out right now. And after some time, the user will complain, hey, there's something wrong. And then you have to fix the whole thing again. So the basic problem here is you have to do too many manual steps. And what I'm saying is, I don't say that the community tools are bad, of course not, but I think you should scope it to the development system only. So you don't have to start it and connect directly to production, because everything should be deployed with just one single step. So basically, focus on this one and forget the rest. So this is our goal for now. And let's talk about it, how we can achieve this. damn it. Okay. Well, before we go to the next slide about different strategies, I would like to show you some components. And when you think about a CI/CD concept, you have to think about those components. For example, mail integration. And of course, you can say, okay, mail integration, that's straightforward. Yeah, I don't care. It's nothing to do with deployments. Well, actually it is, because usually when you have some customer project, okay, you start to develop stuff and say, okay, after the second release, we would like to enable our mail integration. Well, if you do that, yeah, you have to think about XML filters. So you might know it. Okay, you got the user-based filters and global filters and things like that. And an enterprise environment usually have to align those filters, because if they have different things, yeah, every user sees different data and so on. So it's a good approach to align it. And while when you say mail integration, yeah, it should be part of a deployment, yeah, because otherwise you have manual steps as well, and you have to activate thousands of mailboxes. Of course, you can disable the approval process, but usually you just have to enable it. And well, they have a limit. There's a limit of, I think it's 250 or something. So if you have 10,000 users, you can't do it manually. So it must be part of your deployment. And what people are usually doing is they start to write scripts, and custom scripts are, yeah, they're useful and they can do their job. But you always have to think about timeouts and web proxies and plain credentials and things like that. I will give you some recommendations about custom scripts. I think it's slide number 20 or so, I don't know. Anyway, you have to think about another very important thing about mail integration is if you enable mailboxes and thousands of them, you have to talk to the IT department first, because usually when you enable 10,000 mailboxes, Dynamics will connect, well, the Dynamics server will connect to Exchange server, and if both or just any of them is on premise, they will close the connections, because data starts syncing, and well, if they don't know it, they are not expecting such a workload, and you will run into a lot of issues. Okay, well, I think mail integration is clear so far, but also custom code and workflows and so on. So I think I already mentioned that in the last slide. You really should find a way to automate, to deploy those things out in an automated way, and don't copy files or something, because usually when they do that, people will start to override each other's changes, and you will run a lot of issues. Okay, this one is fine so far. Okay, strategies. Well, I already mentioned that I think there are three basic strategies here. Yeah, you can say no pipelines, which basically means you do it manually. You just export zip file solutions, import it, and then you have to do those Excel versions on. Second approach is custom scripts, and this is a very well-known approach, because usually people start to using community tools and write some custom scripts, and altogether is needed to execute the deployment. And well, it works again, but custom scripts, you have to estimate the efforts, and the efforts are quite high to write scripts, yeah, because usually just write, okay, a few lines, okay, it's fine, let's try it. Yeah, okay, well, you have to do it again because you're running a timeout. Then you have to implement paging and things like that. And well, a lot of big international consulting companies, they have their own teams for that, and they have prepared scripts and so on. Yeah, that's fine, that's fair enough. Yeah. But don't assume that you can write a script immediately within a few hours. Yeah, usually this doesn't work. A lot of different issues, and yeah. Well, and the third-party concept is what you can do. You can buy a third-party solution or use something else. Let's take a closer look on the next slide. Okay. Well, we got different approaches. Yeah, and for example, the last line here is KDDM. It's a company deployment manager. I know this is not a sales pitch here, but I need something for reference. But you can use any other tools as well. And I think the main difference here is manual. Of course, I don't have to explain it. The efforts are really high, and there's a high risk of errors and things like that. So it's really not a good approach. It's fair enough for small projects, yeah. But usually you should really go for a manual approach. And well, I'm really happy that Microsoft has announced that they are going to launch, or actually it's already available, a DevOps extension. It's called Power Platform Build Tools, and it can be used to find an automated way to deploy solutions. So you can fulfill most of the basic requirements like export and import solutions, but for data transfer, for example, you have to use multiple tools. And now we're running the same issue. You have to start it again, and you have to configure your proxies, and you need to think about credentials. And remember that sometimes in an enterprise environment, you don't have access to production systems. So what people are usually doing is to write some kind of deployment guide, and some employee of the customer has to execute all the steps. And well, based on my experience, it's quite painful because you have to explain them every single detail. Yeah, it's very painful sometimes. So, well, dynamic configuration data, yeah, and you can find a way to use community tools and custom scripts, and altogether can do the job. Yeah, but yeah, it's quite cool for many projects, but sometimes you're running a lot of issues. And if you're a big company, you have your own team for that. That's fair enough. Yeah. But for example, if you don't have enough resources, or you don't have so many people who can do actually based on knowledge or something, you can go to a third-party approach. And I think one of the biggest advantages is you have an enterprise SLA. Yeah? So for community tools, usually you can talk to people, yeah, but customers would like to have some SLA-based support concept. But let's take a look on the features on the next slide. A few months ago, I've made a comparison here, and of course, with the community tools, you can implement your deployment strategy. You can export solutions, you can import solutions, and do things like that. But when you have to move data, it's a little bit more complicated. So for example, let's talk about this one. Hierarchy data. So it's, for example, like business units. You can't import them with an Excel worksheet. Actually, it's possible, but it's the efforts are quite high because, of course, you have a predefined ID and you have to import it in the right order. And sometimes there's a problem between the systems, and what people are usually doing, they just don't care. Yeah, they say, okay, I got my test system and I have some business units there, and the real data is in production. Yeah, that works, but then you have to recreate some test data every time. Yeah? And the same thing is with the product catalog. And the product catalog is basically just configuration data with multiple routes. So you have your predefined products at the top level, and then you have your whole tree there. And another interesting thing is missing value detection. That basically means, okay, if you have some environment-specific values, for example, key value, and you have to enter the data to another system, for example, a connection string to another system or something. And well, what developers usually do, okay, they're using those values in their code and they just load the data and everything is fine on test, development, and so on. But sometimes nobody is, is writing some deployment guide or just add the details to some guide or something, yeah, and so, well, you have missing values. On the production, okay, there's a null pointer exception or something like that, and nobody is able to figure out, okay, what's going on. So, well, those tiny things can make your whole deployment experience much better, yeah. And another cool thing is, for example, configure Outlook filters. Well, I've seen that so many times that people start to write custom scripts to do that. It works, yeah, but it's painful if you have to do it again and again. And well, another thing is disable plugin steps. Well, when I read such a line in deployment guide, okay, go to the folder, export the solutions, import them, then open plugin registration tool, and so on, disable some steps, yeah. Well, you can do that, yeah, but there are so many cases when people skip some lines or forget about some plugins or something, or they forget to enable them again. Yeah, so running a lot of different issues here. So really, please make sure that when you're writing such deployment guides, yeah, that you write at least some little things about, okay, how can I verify that everything is fine? So like a smoke test or something. Yeah, you really need to make sure that the person who is executing the steps in the deployment guide is able to make sure that everything works again after the deployment. And yeah, there are a lot of other things as well, like, okay, SQL queries, trigger workflows, and like this one. And when I say trigger workflows, I'm talking about the enterprise environment. I don't say, okay, you need to trigger workflows for 100 records. You need to trigger them for 1 million records. And yeah, well, same thing again, they start to use some toolbox and execute it, yeah. Maybe it works, yeah, but not for a non-technical person. So always think about, okay, a person with not much technical knowledge has to do that. So, well, yeah, it failed in many, many cases. Yeah, okay, we can skip the rest here. For the next slide, let's make some assumptions here. Well, this is a very classical enterprise environment here. Okay, we got a AD, we got our 10,000 users, we got mail integrations here online. And one important thing I would like to talk about on the next slide is we got Azure DevOps on-prem, and we don't have access to production. Yeah. Okay, well, some technical deployment considerations. In an enterprise environment, when you first go to the customer and say, okay, let's start with a project, and after a few months, you have your first release in production, and then you have to think about code branching. And what people usually do is that they really don't care. They just say, okay, well, we are in production, and if we have a hotfix, yeah, we just export the solution via patch, and that's it. Well, yeah, that works. But if you have to continue your development activities on your test system or development system, you're not able to deploy a hotfix because, of course, you have dependencies. And I recently had such a case, yeah, then you have to think about, okay, we need to roll back the changes or import old solutions, and then we're able to export it, and then you really have to verify, okay, there are no dependencies and so on. So when I'm saying code branching, you have to think about two things. Yeah. One thing is you need additional systems, like hotfix systems or stable systems or whatever, and you need to create additional branches. So, for example, like a Git branch, a main stable branch, and a release 2 branch or whatever. Yes, it's completely up to you, but you have to think about it, yeah. Because usually when you wait until you need it, there's no time to do that, and then you have to rewrite your changes, and the whole thing's a mess. Yeah. User blocking, and this is one thing people usually don't do because the efforts are too high. Yeah. When you're in an environment with more than 1,000 users, you have to block those users because, of course, you can announce internally, okay, the system is in maintenance mode and you should not access this. Yeah, but sometimes people just ignore it. Yeah, so really think about how to block users, and don't do that on a system user level. You really should block those users on the business unit level because it's much faster. Yeah? You can't block 10,000 users because the process takes minutes to do that. And it's much better if you just block the business unit and nobody's able to access it. And of course, this should be part of your deployment steps. So your deployment pipeline consists of multiple steps. And the first thing is, okay, export solutions and so on, and then you have to import it. But before you import any solution or any data, you should make sure that nobody is able to access the system. Of course, you have to exclude system administrators. Another very funny part is credential management. Well, actually, people say that's not a difficult thing, yeah, because you just have your connection string and that's it. No, it's not, yeah, because in most cases in an enterprise environment, there are some compliance restrictions and policies. So you're not allowed to use any plain text passwords, and always prefer application users, yeah, app ID, client secret, use some encrypted way to store the data, yeah. Well, just make sure it's encrypted, yeah. Yeah, cloud application restrictions and those things are not so important. Yeah. Logging, that's a funny thing, yeah, because I have seen this thing so many times, yeah. When people writing scripts, yeah, nobody knows what's going on. But just take a look at the scripts. Okay, it's failed for some reason. I don't know. I have to think about it. I have to take a look at the system. Well, yeah, if you have direct access to the system, you can do that, yeah. But if you don't have access to the system, there's so many communication, and it's not the efficient way to do that. So I'll make sure your logging is useful when you don't have access to the system. And yeah, okay, failure handling. I think we can ignore those things. Okay, well, this is a very typical use case here, and we can ignore the dev part here. Let's focus on the other two connections here. So we got a connection from DevOps to Dynamics. And this is important to know. So actually you have to know, okay, who is establishing the connection? In this case, okay, from the customer network to the cloud to Azure. And you usually have to think about web proxies. And my recommendation here is if you write custom scripts to connect to Dynamics 365, think about two things, yeah, web proxies and maybe some split DNS concept or something. So I'll talk to the IT department before you implement your scripts, and think about MFA. Sometimes you're forced to use something like MFA, multi-factor authentication, so on. Think about those things, yeah. And of course, timeouts, and yeah, I've seen that so many times when people start to implement in scripts, yeah, everything works and suddenly it stops for some reason, yeah. In most cases, this is the root cause of such things. And another cool thing is the second connection here, from Dynamics to Exchange. In this case, if you have to enable the mail integration. And yeah, of course, usually it's very straightforward. Use your Exchange web service URL, put it into some field in Dynamics and start to sync. No, this is not how it works. If you do this for more than 10,000 users, I'm pretty sure some DMZ or firewall or something will block you. So make sure that the people who are maintaining the Exchange infrastructure know that what's going on. So you have to notify them in advance. Okay. I want to show you some of my general recommendations, and those things are based on my experience after a few years in enterprise environments. And I think one thing is pretty clear: use application users. For some very simple reason, the password usually cannot expire. Of course, you have your client credentials, and they are limited sometimes, but it's still much better than normal users. And people cannot misuse your user for some other task. Sometimes when people have a different language, I know for most of you based in UK, you don't care, but for German-speaking people, for example, you have to change the language. So if you need to customize something or have access to the solutions, you need to have, they need to change to a base language, for example, English, and sometimes people use your deployment user to do that. So just try to avoid those things. And of course, you can, you don't have to use a license for application user. Second thing, English is a base language. This is not because I like the English language, it's just because there are so many technical things, and avoid the risk of translation-based issues. I mean, if you generate code based on some metadata or something, stick to the English language, because sometimes you have some other weird letters or something, and the whole thing is broken after a while, and so it's much better to use English for that. Single user, of course, it's easier to analyze trigger chains and unmanaged components, layers. Well, I think this is one of the most common root causes of failed deployments. People have unmanaged layers and they go to production, say you have to change that immediately. Just do that. Well, don't do that. You have to invest a lot of time to fix it afterwards. So it's much better if you say, okay, let's be clean and use the deployment chain for that. It's much better than that. Okay, split solutions by components. I think this one is really clear. Automated versioning. Well, people usually just start to use some version, and okay, you have to go to the solution and you have to increase the version number, whatever. Forget about those things. If you do it manually, don't do it at all. It doesn't make sense. There's really no benefit because usually people, okay, they say that's some version. No. Just use an automated way, for example, like a build version of your DevOps pipeline. I think it's much better than that. And well, another funny thing is monitor product versions. When you have a different version, for example, you have wave 2 on production and another version on your integration system. Sometimes there are dependencies. Always make sure that you got the same version. And whole thing, so we can skip this one. And always keep in mind there's a small chance that you have to redeploy or roll back your changes. And that means basically, for example, if you have a timeout, you got an upgrade solution and then you apply the upgrades and it's running into a timeout because there's so many different changes, and then you need to find a way to roll back the changes because sometimes it's not possible to use some kind of database backup or something. So always think about those things as well. Configuration data. This one is pretty interesting. Don't believe in assumptions. Well, usually when I say something like this, people say, okay, this is stupid. It doesn't make sense. Well, each entity is basically the same thing. The structure is the same. You got an entity and you got your attributes, and that's it. Well, not for all of them. For example, the product catalog, it's not possible to import a new product or create a new product with the state published. So you have to set it to draft, and then you can import it, and you can publish it again. And this is just one example. There are a lot of many complex things. So example like web pages. So for example, if you try to deploy portals, you have many different entities with very special behavior on each entity. So always try it before you deploy some stuff to production. Another cool thing is clone document templates. I know the official recommendation from Microsoft is to recreate templates. And when I say templates, I mean Word templates. And or if you create a template and then you have to do it again and again, there's a high chance of mistakes. And Well, I think I will, yeah, I have a specific slide for that where you can see the root cause of deployment failures caused by document templates. Okay, try align to these. I think this is pretty clear. Yeah, we always try to have the same ideas for each environment, and sometimes it's not possible. For example, for currencies, yeah, you can IDs are defined, and then you have to query some lookups and things like that. So it's always try to align the IDs, missing value dependencies. And that's a funny thing. Yeah, the last line, missing environment specific values, I always mentioned that. You can see in a second screenshot here. When you have some kind of environment-specific values, always make sure there's some automated way to check if any values are missing. You can see it here. And yeah, well, this is a screenshot of our product. And when I'm talking about configuration data, there's always a different behavior here. So you can see it here on an attribute-based level. And those different behaviors, I think it's are the most common one, like static, ignore, and so on, and hierarchical auto-resolve. And auto-resolve is pretty cool. That means you can query based on the primary attribute name, the actual ID. For example, currencies, if you query for US dollar, you will get a different ID. So if you design such a deployment pipeline, implement those things as well. Okay, component updates. Okay, I need to skip some lines because I'm running out of time otherwise. Okay, yeah, you really should make sure that you don't use any SDK tools and connect to production directly. So try to find a way. It's actually quite simple. Yeah, it's just some very basic data. You just have to update an entity and you can deploy your web resources, your plugins and things like that. So just make sure you don't have to do it manually. And yeah, never use the online editor for web resources. I've seen that many times that people try to enter some JavaScript code directly on production using this weird UI. There are a lot of non-printable characters and the code is not executable, and forget about it. Use something to deploy it in an automated way. And of course, you can use your solution for that. Okay, custom scripts, a few things to think about when you are using Azure Pipelines. When you're writing custom scripts, you're running in non-interactive mode. So always make sure there's no credential prompt or any other things like that, because of course your script will fail. And outputs are visible. That's actually pretty clear. And interesting thing, you got memory limits. It's around about 100. So if you have to input a lot of data, always keep that in mind. Yeah. Don't cache too much, because you will run out of memory. Versioning, okay, and yeah, always merge your branches. Yeah, if you have a new release and release to production or any other system, yeah, always try to merge your code-based branches. Okay, well, let's take a look at our first use case here. And well, a lot of our customers ask me the same question. Hey, is it supported to deploy flows, and how can we do that? You already might know it. Okay, it's a pretty new feature, and now you can include your flows into your solution. Basically, it's just a process, and this process consists of a JSON file and some configuration metadata. But basically, it's just a workflow in a different format. And when you try to import such a solution to your environment, usually we get something like this. And if you're using the new portal, yeah. And then you have to connect your existing flows to a specific connector connection here. And well, of course, this is a problem. You can't have any user prompts or something when you have your Azure Pipelines. And well, I found a way to do that and to include it in an automated pipeline. Actually, it's quite easy. You just need to know some technical details, and then you can implement the changes. What you need to know here is you have to think about the three different things. You got your connection references, which is basically just a very simple entity with 5 or 6 attributes. You got connections, and those connections are not managed in your CDS. It's managed within Power Automate. So it's not a basic entity, but you can use those values. And another thing is flows. And flows, as I said, just a JSON file, and this can be transported by your solutions. you can see it here. Basically, exported solution is just a zip file, and when you go through the different directories, you will find something. Actually, this one is wrong. It's not the solution XML, it's the customization XML. And you will find something like this. Your connection reference, Golet in this case is just an example, and the JSON. And the JSON is basically just the implementation of any flows. And so you can take a look at the structure here, and of course you can have multiple connections and so on, but let's keep it simple, just one connection here. And the basic challenge here, what needs to be done is you have to go to your target system and create different connections. We will see in the next slide. Then you can just import your solution. And when you import a solution via SDK method, like the normal way, it will result in an invalid state. So if you take a look at your connection references, you will see the connection ID is null. And that basically means, you can't use it. So you have to go to the portal and open your flow and say, okay, I would like to have a connection to this specific connector. And well, next one, okay. And you can see it here. So what I just said is this one, there's a connection entity called connection reference. Can't find it here. Okay, anyway, and this entity connection reference has actually 3 different attributes: connector ID, connection reference on, and the important one is connector ID. And this is some random value. And you can get those values from your existing connection. So you basically have to go to make.powerapps.com and find those values. And after that, you can write some custom code to update all invalid connection references. And here we go, that's it. And basically, it's very simple, The only bad thing about the whole case is you have to go manually to the portal and create the specific connections. But this is just a one-time step. So it's just one initial thing, and after it has been done, you don't have to do anything else. You can include it to your automated pipelines. And a second use case, this one is pretty old, but it's still valid. Document templates.
Sorry, Robert. Do you mind if we? There's a couple of questions on the connection references.
Sure.
So I don't know if the questions have been answered because I just don't know enough about connection references. But there seems to be a fairly complex process to be able to deploy flows with an existing connection reference. Is that what you're aiming at? So if you go through that process that you outlined, you can, but you have to write custom code. Is that correct?
Well, basically you can use other tools as well. The connection reference is just a basic entity, and the only thing you need to do is you have to update this entity with a specific value. So you have to retrieve those values from the portal, and then you have to update the entity. So maybe you can use other tools as well. For example, our tool fully supports this approach, but I'm pretty sure there's some XM toolbox plugin or something which can be used to update values.
Okay, right. So I've actually got this problem with a customer at the moment. I thought that once we had set the connection up in the target environment, then we would be able to deploy the flows to that environment and everything would just work and they would be enabled. Is that am I right in that, or is it actually like you said, it's actually more complicated?
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated because if you import the solution, the connection, of course, if you do it via SDK, so if you use the portal, you will prompt it and everything's fine. But if you use it, if you use the SDK measures for that, you have to update the connection references. And if you do that, all flows are disabled. Then you have to go to the portal to each single flow and say, okay, I would like to turn it on again. Because if you change the data, the whole thing is disabled automatically. So there are 2 things you need to do: update the connection reference and activate all flows.
Okay. I'm very conscious that you have more content to get through. So if you want to park this until the end, that's absolutely fine. There were a couple of other questions around this, so it's up to you. Yeah,
well, I just have two other slides, and then I'm done, and then we can focus on the questions.
Okay, great. If that's all right with everyone, we'll move it to the end. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, okay, sure. Well, okay, then we'll quickly just explain the situation here. I think it's pretty clear. Yeah, if you try to deploy document templates, there's something called entity type code, which is a legacy thing, but it's still used, and it might be different on each system. So basically, you have to open the zip file, and then you have to change those values and so on. So it's a little bit complicated, but the important message here is don't assume that everything works as expected. Yeah, for example, document templates is a very specific behavior, so you can't just export it and import it to another system. And there are a lot of different situations like this. Okay, okay, governance, we can split this one. And this is my last slide here regarding compliance and enterprises. It's just a basic summary of what I've already said. And always think about custom scripts, web proxies, avoid credentials, use service principals, and yeah, analysis without production access. So logging is pretty important here, and yeah, try to block the users. But I think those things are really straightforward. You just have to make sure that you do it, and because basically people know it, yeah, but they just ignore it because it's effort and you have to do it, and so they just try to skip it. Okay. Okay, now I can read the questions here. I don't know. Is it better if I say it again, or should I read the text here?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to read through them. If anybody, Ilias or Karel, if you want to come off mute and ask your questions, that's absolutely fine. Maybe your questions have changed based on other things that Robert has said earlier in the session. So
yeah, I'm fine with that. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Karel.
Yeah. Hello. Hi all. Well, basically, you answered the question partly. So my understanding as a conclusion of that is that connection reference is a standard entity as any other. And you can, during the deployment, you can set up these IDs, let's say, of the new connection reference. Once you get the ID from the target environment and you configure it correctly inside of the solution, you might succeed with and not breaking anything else while customizing the XML. And will this result in being flow on after this deployment, or still it will need a manual input and go into and turn it on?
Well, I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but after you have imported those, you have to go to the system and you have to turn it on. Yeah, so you have to take a look at all flows and say, okay, I would like to activate them. And
so still, you need to go inside and turn the flow on. I mean, using DevOps pipeline. If you do this manually using the manual import, flows are on, and you don't have to do that. That's the main difference currently between manual import and automated import. Using DevOps, you need to go inside, and each and every flow you need to turn on and confirm connections. If you do this manually, you just import. Connection references are still the same, just confirm them, and it's all, let's say, nice and shiny.
It is, by the way, I've written a blog about the whole topic, but basically activate a flow is a very simple process. You just need to change the state. So you got a status code and the state code, and you set to both to activate it. So just I think the value is 1 and 2, and then the values are, the flows are activated. So of course you can include this step in your pipeline as well. But I think the main problem here is, the main issue is, if you're using, for example, Power Platform build tools. Currently, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure about that. Currently, it's not possible to include flows. So you have to go to environment and activate them. And my statement here is it's possible. You just need to update the connection reference. And after that, you can update the state codes of the flows as well, and everything's fine. So I try to avoid every manual steps.
Okay, yeah, Robert, I saw that you did a blog on this, around this topic. I wonder if you would be able to put the link to that into the chat. And there you go.
Yeah, I just pasted it in the chat, yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you. Ilias, I know that you had a couple of questions, so I guess one of the questions, if you want to come off mute, that's fine, and ask the question yourself. But so you're asking in your second question, I think, where the custom code would be executed. So I'm assuming from what you said, Robert, we're talking about the PowerShell script that you're executing through DevOps. Is that correct? So to update those connection reference records.
Exactly, yeah. Well, it doesn't matter if you're using PowerShell or any other .NET-based language or even Java, it doesn't matter. You just need to make sure that you are able to connect to the APIs of Dynamics and update those values. And of course, you can use different SDKs or something. I basically prefer PowerShell and C#.
Yeah, okay. Okay, hopefully that answers your question there, Ilias. Let me know if it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, this is a really clunky process right now. I know it's brand new and connection references are new and they're still in preview and yet everyone still has to use them. You've got to hope that this stuff is going to get better pretty quickly. So hopefully in the next, even in the next weeks, this will get better because it seems unusually difficult to force you to use something and then not really provide any support for deploying, with DevOps and things like that. Okay, there's no other questions. I don't think there are any other questions that we've missed so far, but I guess what you're basically saying is that like the Power Apps build tools, my experience of them is that they do some things and they do some things pretty well. Then you generally have to fill the gaps. I would normally look at something like Wael Hamza's tools that are also available for DevOps to fill lots of gaps. That's open source, but actually the product that Crypto is filling a lot of other stuff as well, and it's obviously a supported product. So that looks really interesting. I'm going to look at it for a customer that I'm working with, but thank you for that. Was there anything else you wanted to cover?
Well, so far nothing to add from my side. Just want to say thank you for listening, and hopefully I was able to give you some advantages or some recommendations regarding enterprise deployments.
Great stuff. Thanks, Robert. And I would just like to say thank you to Robert for putting the session together and presenting today. It's really very kind of him to spend his time doing that. And if we could come off mute at this point and give Robert a round of applause, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Obviously, it's not quite as good as getting a round of applause in person, but it's what we've got right now. But thanks very much. Okay, so the session was recorded. We will upload the slides, or you can upload the slides, Robert, to the user group website, and so any links and that sort of thing would be in there. But thanks very much. So just on my side, actually, let me post the link into the feedback if you would like to give feedback later on. Unfortunately, the feedback is done, I say unfortunately, it's done with Microsoft Forms, which doesn't let you just fill in part of the form like right now, just for Robert's session. But I've put the link into the chat there. There's lots of thank yous from people that were in the session. So yeah, but if you can give feedback at the end of the day, obviously there is that feedback prize as well for some lucky winner, but that's always very helpful for speakers to understand if their content was kind of aimed at the right level, if there's anything they could improve on, and also just to say thanks for the content in the first place. But no, thanks very much, Robert, and we'll leave it there. So the next sessions are at 1:30. They start at 1:30. Let me just run through what they are very quickly. If you're able to join, let me see, oops. So they would be, if someone beats me to it. Okay, so at 1:30, yeah, we have that Power BI performance optimization session, and also automated test strategy with low code options using, damn it, I've forgotten the tool. It's just fallen out of my head, but it's a spec flow. So that'd be an interesting session. And then we also have a case study from DQ Global around their tools as well. So yeah, that's starting at 1:30, and the links to those are on the agenda page. So you could just go back to that page. But thanks very much, Robert, and we'll leave it there. Thanks.